Greetings out there in graduate school land. I hope everybody's doing great this week. This week we're going to flip the script a bit. The last few weeks we've been pretty obsessed with the idea that attitudes cause behaviors and debates about the causal claim, the correlation claim that attitudes cause behaviors, that you think a certain way and therefore your behavior follows in suit in one capacity or another. This week we're flipping it completely and working at whether behaviors can cause attitude changes. And so this is a concept that I think is really widely applicable in the world of persuasion. That's the world of interpersonal persuasion, in the world of economic persuasion and marketing exchanges and advertising. You think about things like try something before you buy something. Try it before you buy it. Think about ideas like renting to own, thinking about ideas like a test drive, even ideas like a money-back guarantee, are all in some ways a quest to incentivize consumers who might be resistant, have an attitudinal resistance to making a purchase or engaging in an experience, to then put their toe in the water, experience what the new car feels like to drive, experience what the timeshare feels like to experience for a weekend or so, and then the attitude follows after the behavior. There's a great line of social science research that is somewhat controversial about whether it's actually effective, but that picks up on this idea that behaviors can in fact cause attitude change or influence attitude change, and that is the quote-unquote fake it until you make it idea. So one example of this is from research on self-confidence, specifically research on self-confidence in a very fraught situation that many Americans, in fact most Americans, are petrified of, which is giving a public speech. And so many Americans say that they're more afraid of giving a public speech than they are of things like spiders and shark attacks, and so lines of research and self-help books have tried to address that kind of phobia and anxiety. And one line of research with questionable results has said that if you adopt a, quote, power pose before your audience, you stand with your shoulders wide, your feet wide, directly facing the audience, direct eye contact, these are the kinds of codes of the quote, unquote, power pose that the researcher was going for, that you can not only influence the way that you come across the audience as not seeming nervous or timid, but you can in fact trick your brain retroactively by adopting it, right? In other words, the body influences the mind. The power pose then somehow influences or tricks or even manipulates your own brain into thinking that you're in control of a situation that you previously felt out of control of. The behavior causes the attitude. Another example is in other socially phobic situations in which somebody might feel nervous or even depressed, there are some controversial lines of research about smiling, that you can sort of smile your way to happiness. If you project externally happiness out to the world, you can project internally that same happiness back upon yourself. Regardless, the idea is a part of a bigger paradigm, and the paradigm is called the CAA paradigm, the counter-attitudinal advocacy paradigm. Academics are very good at naming things. That's sarcasm. So that's something that really rings off the lips, rings the ears. Counter-attitudinal advocacy. So you'll see through the upcoming lecture lots of mentions of CAA. And CAA as an instance is where I engage in counter-attitudinal advocacy to affect an attitude that I have through behavior that is counter to the belief that I have or the attitude that I have, so CAA. But it's also reflective of this paradigm. The paradigm grows up in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, is really honed in the 1960s, about the influence of counter-attitudinal advocacy on our behaviors. And just in a larger nutshell, what this research looks like, what it continues to look like because it's still quite influential, is a researcher identifies a specific population. Let's say this population is of religious people who hold extremely religious beliefs. And one of the things that the researcher might want to do is to figure out the nature of their beliefs, how closely held their beliefs are, how often they engage in behaviors related to those beliefs. So do you believe in God? How often do you reflect on that belief in God? Do you go to church regularly? Amongst members of your group, how fervent is your belief? How fervent is your belief versus other beliefs? All of these sorts of things are relevant to the researcher's pretest. So that's the pretest, just figuring out what people's attitudes are. Then the test is to actually have them engaged in counter-attitudinal advocacy. And that can look a few different ways. You could give a public speech expressing the opposite. So if you're a religious person, you should give, in some sense, an anti-religious speech, an atheistic speech, or some speech that goes against a very specific church doctrine that you believe in. It doesn't have to be full-bore atheism. It could be something a little bit more targeted. Regardless, you engage in the CAA advocacy in a public way. You write a letter, you give a speech, you write an essay, you participate in a conversation and effectuate and advocate this one particular point of view that runs counter to your attitude. And then the third step is the post-test. In the post-test, what the researcher is interested in is the effect of the counter-attitudinal advocacy on the behavior and on the belief of the participant. So did the participant feel nervous? Did the participant feel excited? Did the participant feel shame? Did they feel embarrassed? Did the attitude actually change? Did they actually moderate or somehow lessen or even convert their own belief system through the attitudinal advocacy? This idea is as old as our first lecture on ethos, pathos, and logos. In fact, one of the oldest rhetorical traditions that we know from the 5th and 6th centuries is called the progymnasmata. The progymnasmata is a series of rhetorical exercises that Cleopatra did and even Shakespeare did, and they were really popular as an educational tool in rhetoric up until roughly around the Civil War in the United States. But it was born about 2,000 years ago, and it's just a series of exercises to get better at writing and speaking. But several tenets of the progymnasmata, these sort of drills, are really about just taking the opposite side, something you might link to law school education right now, which is to identify how you believe about something, how you feel about something, and to argue the opposite, and to become really good and persuasive about arguing the opposite, and thereby being able to compare both sides of a situation and arrive at a greater, clearer truth for yourself. But this ancient idea really picks up steam in the US Academy amongst persuasion researchers, as I said, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and leads to this paradigm, the counter-attitudinal advocacy, CAA paradigm. And we're going to devote the rest of this lecture to really one of the most famous instances of the counter-attitudinal advocacy paradigm in action. And it's not just one of the most famous instances of the CAA paradigm, it's among the most famous cognitive, psychological, and communication theories that we have in the US Academy after World War II. So we'll dedicate the rest of this lecture to this theory, the theory of cognitive dissonance, to try to get to some greater answer as to how and why behaviors can change attitudes.